Look, on Leadership Now, I promised never to do commercials, but here we are. Why? Well, I have a new book in the works. It's coming out spring 2026, and I wanted to give you an advance heads up about it. The title, The Future of Work is Gray, and it's kind of a big deal to me because the book dives into the age crisis that's reshaping work as we know it. It's something that I call age debt, but spoiler alert, it does turn into some solution. There's some hope, there's some positive, and that's called the experience dividend. So if your workplace still thinks that age is a liability, well, it's time to retire that mindset. In fact, we might want to retire the word retire. So yeah, I don't do ads. This is a special occasion, and for it, I am willing to go gray. And maybe Grey Goose will sponsor me, not sure. Anyway, spring 2026, the future of work is gray. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Pontefract. Today in the house, Megan Gerhardt, Dr. Gerhardt. So good to meet you. A little bio, and then we're going to get right into one of my favorite new mashup words ever, Gentelligence. So Dr. Gerhardt, Professor of Management and Leadership at Miami University, Farmer School of Business. In addition to her academic work, she consults and speaks with leading organizations worldwide on leveraging generational diversity in the workplace and is the author of a fab book called Gentelligence, a revolutionary approach to leading an intergenerational workforce. Her Gentelligence framework was featured as Harvard Business Review's Big Idea in March 2022 and selected for HBR's Top 10 Must-Reads for 2024. Through her work at Gentelligence, Dr. Gerhardt focuses on harnessing individual differences to drive impact and achieve exceptional performance. Dr. Gerhardt, thank you for joining me today on Leadership Now. I know you're a prof of leadership and management and a speciality inside of the workforce generations, and particularly with the, as I say, my favorite mashup word ever, Gentelligence. Let's give everyone a quick orientation of Gentelligence, and tell me what you mean by it and what we can expect from you over the next 30, 35 minutes in our conversation.
Absolutely. So Gentelligence is a word I came up with. I think it's been 8 years now. And I hope when you hear it, you just automatically understand what it means. But it really means that we need to get smarter about the way that we are thinking about generational and age differences in the workplace. So as you know, the landscape on this is pretty negative. We tend to, when we do hear about this in organizations, it is often from a place of tension. It's looked at as a frustration. It is often in the media looked at, through a generational shaming and judging lens, rather than the view that Gentelligence takes, which is there is so much potential for collaboration, for learning, change, growth, all the things that we need right now. If we could switch our viewpoint and instead look at this very diverse age landscape we have in organizations as an opportunity rather than a threat. So all the work I do, I say that the mission is creating smarter intergenerational conversations in the workplace.
Ooh, smarter intergenerational conversations in the workplace. So
Yes.
One, I guess, tangential question is, how are we doing? I mean, does it feel like we've cracked this nut, or is that the reason why you're still doing great work in so many different organizations?
Yeah, I will say I am hopeful. I don't think we can say we've cracked the nut yet. I've been doing this for 10 or 15 years, since the millennials first hit the workplace, and we were very, judgy and negative about them. And then that cycle just continues. It's a pun intended age-old cycle that whenever we get a new generation in the workplace, we just don't like it. They bring norms that aren't ours, and they're difficult and they're wrong because they're not doing it the way that we think it should be done. And that's, when we were writing the book, we found quotes going all the way back to Plato about what's wrong with these kids, like they're never gonna hack it. Those are sort of these timeless quotes. So I don't think we've changed that mindset. I am seeing organizations that are much more interested in having this discussion, are willing to invest in thinking through new tools and ways to do it. I am seeing slowly some programs and some policies in place that I think will be very helpful. But I will tell you that in most organizations I go to, this very simple idea that we should apply what we know from research and best practice around how you effectively leverage difference to age or generations is something that we just, for some reason, have not thought of that way before. So it's almost like we skipped that day. We've worked hard. I'm not saying we've gotten there, but we've worked hard on how do we leverage other kinds of diversity. Certainly lots of great talented people and great work on DEI and all these different spaces related to race and gender and many different things. But it's almost like age and generation got a pass, which is fascinating because it is obviously part of all workplaces. We've always had multi-generational workplaces. We will continue to have them. It's becoming even more of a demographic challenge. But also, it's very unique in that, age is the one kind of difference where we will all hopefully be all the ages,
Mm.
right? It's one of those things where over time, your generation, we can get into that if you want. Your generation is kind of a social construction that comes with its own interesting set of norms. But age-wise, I am now middle-aged, whereas when I started this, I don't think I would have classified myself then. And so it's a very important and potentially incredibly productive conversation to have. But most organizations have been given very few valid tools. When I do my talks, I'm sure you could already tell, I'm a very straightforward, like blunt person. And I start by saying, I know what you're all waiting for. You're waiting for that slide deck where I'm going to put up like generation, years, 3 things that happened in your life, the way everyone in your generation acts and behaves. And I don't do that. That's generational stereotyping. That drives me nuts. Like, I can't tell you how you and 70 million people around your age, give or take, are because you tell me the year that you're born. Like, and that's honestly the best most of us have been given is like an infographic and here's what all your Gen Zs want. Go, which is ignorant and lazy and not productive. So we've really been working to try to help people first of all, change their mindset that this could be an opportunity and not just an irritating threat. And second of all, if that's true, what tools could we give them to help them kind of get there? So I don't think we're doing very well, but I think that it is in part because we haven't been given good, practical, actionable strategies so far.
I love how you point out that we've done some pretty good work on the DEI file on racism, but it seems to me that we don't have a term yet for almost what you're talking about, which is kind of why Gentelligence came to be. We know instinctively, I suppose, right, what ageism is, where whether you're older, you're dissing young, and whether you're young, you're dissing the old, or somewhere in between. But is there a generationism, if that's a word? I'm making it up, obviously, right on the spot here. Do you think there's a generationism type of situation that's going on where cliques and pockets and tropes ultimately are inhibiting people from self-developing, organizations from becoming the best that they can be? And I'll add this. I'm sure you came across a couple of years ago now the Indeed mishap where they lined up 5 different generations and basically said, boomers are almost dead, and everyone should hire millennials or Gen Zs. So I'm just curious, like, do we need to educate leaders to be better handling what generations not necessarily are by tropes, but some of the things, as you point out, that people go through in a career ultimately?
Yeah, so much to unpack there. I think absolutely yes. We can call it like an ungentelligent, maybe. The word that we discovered when we were writing the book was it was marvelous. It was called chronocentrism.
Yeah,
So
I saw that.
believe that your time is the best time, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's very hard to step away from that because the way that I've made sense, I think this hits one of your questions, is the way that I've helped people make sense of how can we stay away from generational stereotypes and generalizations, like all Gen Xers are this way, which we know is not true, but still understand the fact that generational differences are very real. Like, how can both of those things be true, right? Anyone who has a job knows there's something going on. Like, when I work with people significantly older or younger, there are certain things that definitely are different, but I don't want to stereotype. And so there's kind of 2 things that I say. One is the place that I think is the most helpful is when we can talk about generational norms. So, generational norms I talk about a lot in my work, and a norm is just a frequency, right? So, I can say as a Gen Xer, more people in my generation had this experience, had this general attitude, believed this was important. As opposed to my kid or my parents' generation. Not everybody, it doesn't mean, I was not a latchkey kid. I don't fit that trope, but I knew a lot more people that were than my kid or my parents did. And so that was interesting. That was a different sort of experience growing up.
Yeah.
And so I talk a lot about generational norms. And when I do that, kind of people exhale that it's okay for them to notice generational differences and find them either challenging or fascinating without feeling like they're trying to put every single person born in this 15-year time period in a box. So that's, I think, a really helpful piece. The other piece I like to share is how we make sense of the academic research on this, which often just says, hey, we're not finding any generational differences. We don't know what you're all going on about down there doing the work, but like we're not finding anything. So good luck. What I have discovered is it's really this idea. So there are no validated differences in the intrinsic needs of people across ages in the workplace. So you used like the 18 to 88 phrase when we first started chatting. 18 to 88, all the research I've seen has said we seem to have really similar internal needs in the workplace. We need to feel respected. We want to feel connected. We want to feel competent. We want to have agency. And they're depending on the theory or the framework or the research, they'll use different names, like agency or autonomy or mastery or, those types of internal intrinsic needs seem to matter no matter what age you are at work. So if we just stop there, which a lot of academic research does, then you can say, look, this is much ado about nothing. You all are just chasing, this is all pop science. It's not real. But then you contrast that to anyone working side by side with people a lot older and younger who you're thinking, what is going on? Like where I do not understand what you're thinking. And so I think the best way to understand this is to say, we have these shared needs that are such an important common ground that we can always go back to. But what we tend to miss is that the norms we may have learned generationally, our beliefs about how do you earn respect? What does it mean to connect with someone? How do I pursue competence, or how much autonomy is appropriate in a job or in life? Those have a very strong generational anchor. So my favorite example I tell about my dad, who loves being brought up in podcasts. He's 77. He's a very proud baby boomer. And he was a partner in a law firm. And when our book came out, he said, when I started working, the way you got respect is you put your head down and you did your job and you waited for somebody to come tap you on the shoulder. And that's how it worked. And then he said, when I was retiring, these young people, they were the millennials, I would say these young people is capitalized. It's like a loaded phrase.
Yeah.
These young people were coming to me and telling me it was time for their promotion. I don't get that, like hashtag entitled. And it was such a great conversation because I said, well, okay, this is great. This is a great Gentelligence moment because you needed respect. You wanted to earn respect. You wanted to be seen as competent. The norm when you were starting your career was the way you got there, right? The path that worked and was socially acceptable and paid off was put your head down, close your mouth, wait your turn, and someone will come. Fast forward, the millennial generation, for many reasons, valid reasons, they wanted to be, and still do, be respected and seen as competent. But what they learned growing up when they grew up is if you want that, you elbow yourself to the front of the line and you raise your hand and tell people you're ready, because otherwise somebody else is going to get picked over you. So the need is the same, but the norm of how you get there or what works is different. And we judge the norm, right? We're very judgy, all generations, like, well, that's entitled. You're a slacker. Oh, you snowflake. And then we miss the fact that it's coming from a need that we all very much understand. But growing up in a particular period of time, we've learned a different, quote, way to pursue it. And I always, when people are like, I don't know if I believe that, I say, okay, well, let's take connection. I have maybe three ways I connect with people I know, and my son's 20 and he has like 30. And I don't like 17 of them. I think they're irritating and a big waste of time. And why is your head in your phone all the time? But the need is the same, right? He's connecting to people, but he has learned a very different way to do that. And I judge it and think that it's not important or silly or not really communicating. It's just that's a judgment, not a reality. So,
That's fascinating. I mean, and I'm vicariously living through that story. I have a 79-year-old father, a 54-year-old wife, and both of us have raised a 22, 20, and 18-year-old Gen Zers, as we say in Canada. And what I'm glomming onto now with my three Gen Zers is as two of them are sort of in the workforce part-time, they're still in university, but they're coming into some of these situations where their attributes that they desire are the same as what mom and dad wanted and what my dad want, i.e., agency, empowerment, belonging, all the good attributes you allude to. But you've just cracked the code for me on something. The methodology in which to get there is much different. And I think perhaps you've cracked that code again on what leaders are missing out on that they actually have to adjust for inside the workplace. What do you think?
yeah, I mean, I think that's to me, it was like a big aha moment because having a foot in both academic and practice, I'm
Yeah.
thinking, like, how can both of these things be true, right? How can we make sense of this? And I think that's the the key for leaders particularly. It's very hard because it's not that we shouldn't have standards, and this is a question I get a lot. Like, standards are fine. It's not that we have to reduce our standards or change our standards necessarily because the younger generation isn't used to it, doesn't like it. Standards are fine, but it's a question of it's very possible that what one generation is going to need to learn or the kind of support they're going to need to get to your standard might be quite different than it was for the last generation walking in the door. So I have a client who was talking about how young people coming in, they were doing like a entry level, service job. And she said, these kids say don't even know how to mop a floor. It was like this total frustration. And I was like, thought it's always like a lot of sort of frustration and judgment. And I said, okay, well, let's talk about it. Like, totally legitimate that they don't know and they should know and you need them to know. Like, not going to argue about any of that. But there's always a why. And Gentelligence is about like no generation raises themselves. So why might this generation not walk in the door knowing how to mop if that's something Gen Xers, for example, sort of grew up knowing? Well, these kids are on like travel soccer teams. They're out playing 16 hours a weekend and then they've got 12 hours of homework. And, so I think we like to be like, oh, no work ethic, don't even know how to mop a floor. Well, let's not shame them into let's say, well, it looks like maybe you didn't get this piece of development that prior generations sort of tended to have. So we're going to need to meet you where you're at. Like, you do need to know how to mop. We're not going to let that one go, but let's have a half-hour lesson. Like, everybody come in, we're going to mop the floor. And I use that kind of as a silly but real
Yeah.
example that, and the same can be true for any generation. So, what do I not know as a Gen Xer that somebody walking in the door right now, knows very intuitively? So I think from a leadership standpoint, it's not right or wrong. It's a being okay with the fact that there are different norms. How can we support people across life stage, different generational norms? What's reasonable? We can't obviously individualize everything, but maybe the most interesting space I've seen companies play with this lately is in the benefits space.
Hmm.
So, you
Well,
think about how benefits have evolved over time as we've started to realize, like, okay, health insurance and retirement is like important, but what else could we reasonably provide to retain our workforce? And so I've seen grandparent leave, for example, was a
yeah.
big trend. I posted something on LinkedIn when Wall Street Journal wrote about this. As baby boomers are helping with more childcare
Yeah.
responsibilities, or want to be more involved or need to be more involved and are staying in the workplace longer than prior generations. Grandparent leave is a thing that, was rarely offered. Why is that more or less valid than, parental leave? We've seen elder care. So people your age and my age, where we are sort of sandwiched supporting aging parents and still raising children, right? I guess they're not children, but they are still children. They're still living in my house. So they're still children at this point. I'm still supporting them.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
and so the idea of elder care leave, my mom just passed away from dementia, and my
Mm.
sister spent so much time, in addition to raising her own family, trying to help support my parents in whatever their needs were. So people our age, like older millennials, Gen Xers, elder care as a benefit. And then as you kind of go down younger, I've seen housing access, like support to help buy your first home, emergency fund access for
Yeah.
people who don't have savings. And then my most favorite, I just wrote a blog about this, pet insurance. And so within like 2 weeks this last summer, I had multiple clients say, I keep getting asked by my Gen Z employees if we offer pet insurance.
Uh,
And they made it sort of this scoffing thing. And I was thinking, first of all, I would not mind pet insurance. I have
yeah,
3 dogs.
yeah, yeah.
But as younger people are waiting longer to have kids, right? Because they're not economically feeling ready, or they don't want to buy a house, or there's lots of reasons why offering pet insurance seems to be some of their pets or their kids. And so, that's an example, right? That's an HR people strategy that a leader would have to say, I'm good with supporting all stages of one's life and career as reasonably as we can. What would we lose by offering kind of this menu of options, saying, hey, you might have different needs than someone a lot older or younger. We don't we don't mind. We kind of think that's great. Come on in. I think that sort of mindset is really important.
I love it. Also, with birth rates plummeting, maybe people just want pets, and maybe that's a way in which for the employer to help them see we want you to be part of our employer situation, and we don't care if you have kids or not. You want a pet, sure, and we'll help you through that. Like that's probably a different type of perquisite that us and Gen X, when we were coming up through the ranks, would never thought about pet insurance being sort of a perk inside the benefits package of an organization. I wouldn't have for sure. But now I get it. Like I can understand fully to your point. Okay, one of your four practices in Gentelligence, which I wanted to dig a little deeper in, double click, as Gen Z says, is expand the pie.
Mm.
And so, if I get it right, it's sort of like challenging this sort of zero sum thinking. And so, tell me a bit about what expanding the pie in practice actually looks like within the generational combustion engine, if you will, of the workplace.
Yeah, so we came up with that term. Obviously, we snagged it from negotiations, that anytime you're operating from a scarcity mindset, it's not going to go well. And at the root of a lot of generational tension is threat, right?
Mhm.
If I'm older and this young person's coming in and they know more about something, tech or whatever it is, than I do, inherently, does that feel threatening to me? That if what you know is now suddenly valuable, is what I know becoming less valuable? And
Right.
if so, that whole thing of psychological safety goes away. Like, well, now I'm going to hoard all of my knowledge and experience. I'm not going to share it with them. They don't have enough. I don't want to do that. Or flip, right? If you're a young person and you feel like all of the benefits and, voice and everything goes to people who are older in the organization, then your willingness to share is probably going to be less. So how do we flip that? And I think we've always put a versus between like old versus young, then them versus us, then versus now. And I'm trying to replace that with a plus. That's like the best
Right.
way to describe that practice. When we wrote our Harvard Business Review article, they renamed the fourth practice their Harvard Business Review, so they can do whatever they want. I'm on board with embrace mutual learning,
Yeah.
which I thought was an interesting way of thinking about it. And so, practically speaking, I experience this all the time. And I'm very into, I said we need more practical tools. So one of the tools I've developed in the last year or two is the set of what I call power questions. So if we want you to have smarter intergenerational conversations, I need to give you power questions to start entering into those conversations. So the power question I love around Expand the Pie is, how would you approach this? So whatever the big sticky challenge is right now for organizations, so whether that's AI integration or return to the office or submit your challenge here, think about the power of, let's say, we'll start with an older person on the team going to the youngest person on the team and saying, we've been talking a lot about how to integrate AI and how to motivate people to use it ethically. And like, such a hard topic. I'm really interested in how you would approach it. Like, what would you do? And it's a simple question, but think of all the things happening from a leadership standpoint. You are first and foremost showing respect to someone that probably is going to be surprised to receive it. Like, oh, me? I'm 24. Wow, okay. That person's interested in my point of view. They are aware that my point of view, my perspective is probably going to be different than their own, and they aren't threatened. They're interested. Okay, game on. So I'm going to share, as the young person on the team, some thoughts. And in my experience, because I use this question a lot, whether it's in my classroom or in workshops, you get something raw, right? You get a lot of like fresh ideas, like younger brains love fluid intelligence. And so all the things, all the new perspectives I'm learning, I'm like, I've never even heard of that. Like, that's interesting, trying to catch. But I always say raw because some of it you already are from like your perspective as an older person going, oh, that's not going to work, or we'd get sued if we did that. But you can't do that, right? You got to just let it go. And through it, I found this almost always happens is one, I learned something, like there's ideas there that I'm going to catch. Two, I learn where their head is at, right? Like, whoa, I thought we were all over here having this conversation and they're like way over there. That's valuable information for me. And then three, if I first ask them what they think, the likelihood they are going to be willing to listen to what I think just went way up. Right? I already showed them that respect authentically. Now they're going to be more willing to listen to me saying, oh, can we talk about that second idea? That's fascinating to me. Tell me more. Or I love that. I have questions. Like, how would we get buy-in on that? Like, what would we have budget for that? Like maybe things I know because I've been here for a couple decades that they haven't necessarily had to think about before, but the idea is still really interesting. So that, and then think about flipping it. If I'm 24 and all I want is like respect and to be able to have my ideas taken seriously, imagine going to the oldest person on my team and saying, we've been talking a lot about AI integration, and I'm just interested, if you were trying to come up with the solution, what would you do? So now as a younger person, I've shown respect to older people who are increasingly feeling like they're not getting it, right? That they're being okay boomered and like written off. I'm going to learn a lot as the younger person. I'm going to learn different perspectives and ways of thinking. And I just got myself an ally who thinks, what a smart young woman. She asked me for advice. I am going to advocate for her. And I can then say, well, I had an idea. Could I run it by you? Or what advice would you have for me if I wanted to try to introduce this idea at our next meeting? And so those are just examples. I've done it with AI. In my own class, like what's our AI policy going to be? I've done it with real problems I've had on how to solve something that I can't figure out on my own. And I guarantee, like all things diversity, all it takes is for you to experience that benefit once yourself, like not on a screen. Like I was told this could be a benefit, but like, wow, I solved that problem with that person that I never could have figured out on my own. I want more of that. Like it becomes kind of addictive, really, to seek out whether it's older or younger. And that's what I mean by expanding the pie, that we're not on different sides of that rope. We should be on the same side of the rope.
And ultimately, perhaps that takes some leadership, right? These are cultural pillars that ultimately need to be inculcated across an organization's ethos. And if an organization is closed-minded, hierarchical, us versus them, as you alluded to, then it's probably that much more difficult in which to get the fluid intelligence meeting the crystallized intelligence, and there to be some sort of cornucopia found in between where that knowledge, mentorship, apprenticeshiping is shared between the two. Is that fair? As it comes down to sometimes cultural nature?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm just today proofing a paper that I'm sending off. It's a conceptual paper, and it's all about like how do we create these workplace climates where people want to share what they know? Like what from a leadership standpoint has to happen? And I'm just trying to pull together lots of disparate streams of research that have looked at this.
Right.
And to your point, it's all about the climate we create.
Yeah.
So the linchpin on whether age and generational diversity helps or hurts is how it's led. Like just period. Like that's what all the research says. If it's not led proactively or well, we don't put practices in place. We're not creating programs where we're endorsing these kinds of collaborations or opportunities or reinforcing them, it's not going to work. We're going to get tension. We're going to get clashes. We're going to get, the us versus them. On the flip, the research shows if we have what's called age, inclusive climates or age positive climates, where we have, age positive HR policies like blind recruitment, or anyone gets access to learning and development, not just the younger people in the organization. And everyone gets an opportunity to contribute meaningfully, not just older people in the organization, those kinds of things. Then it flips. It's a 180 where now age diversity, generational diversity suddenly becomes productive and an asset. So things like, I'm very into mutual mentoring right now. So
Yeah.
mentoring is something everybody is aware of. Reverse mentoring, a la Jack Welch is familiar. But I am very into the idea of mutual mentoring where let's take something that's hard right now, which is pretty much everything, and let's invite in proactively several different generations and say, what do you think about this? When you think about this topic, what comes to mind? And again, it's sort of endorsing as a leader that we love that we have age 18 to 88. Like what a talent potential gold mine that I can hear all those different lived experiences and perspectives, and they can hear each other.
Mm.
And then we can figure out, I'm going to share with you something that blew my mind and see what you think about it. So
Right.
another paper I'm working on with some colleagues is the shifting set of expectations around how much a workplace needs to support our mental health. Something that our generation, the boomer generation, would never have expected. Like that's a personal issue. That's not a work
Right.
issue. Like you handle yourself at home and then show up and do your work. Not really the mentality, definitely not of Gen Z, and to some extent to not the millennials. And so I get this a lot, like the idea of like, what's a self-care day and why is it my problem that you have anxiety and stress? If it's not a documented disability that I legally have to take care of for you, then I don't
I
understand what
love
you're
it. Yeah.
telling me. Like you're oversharing, all of these things. I that's probably the number one question I get when I speak. So this research we did, and we have lots of interesting data around it, shows very clearly a difference between millennials and Gen Zs on sort of one, I don't want to say side, but in one camp, and Gen Xers and boomers in the other camp about whether it's reasonable to expect your workplace to support your mental well-being, and what happens if they don't. Best encapsulated by, we asked a question, and this came from a real experience I had. If you are struggling with mental health, is it responsible to go to work? It was something like that. Like it was a question like, to what extent do you agree with, if I'm struggling with my mental health, the responsible thing is to stay home, right? Versus the responsible thing is to go to work. And clear statistically significant difference. So the younger generation said, if you're struggling with your mental health, out of respect, the responsible thing is to stay home. And on the other camp, Gen Xers and baby boomers saying, if you're struggling with your mental health, the responsible thing out of respect for your organization, your team, is to get yourself to work. And I thought, well, I will be busy for the rest of my life because it's not right or wrong. But if I think, it's, I mean, we don't have time to go into all the reasons why. Like it's the time in which they grew up. It's social media. It's COVID. It's all the things. It's the fact that they've had more accommodations for mental health during their lifetime than older generations. But if I'm their boss and they think they're being responsible by staying home because they're burned out and they're stressed and they're not their best self, and I think that's irresponsible. I'm not saying I do personally, but if that's my generational norm that you get your act together and you just come, wow, like that is fascinating. But my Gen Z colleagues said, well, you wouldn't come to work if you were physically sick. Like that would be wrong. So why would you come if mentally you were not doing well? Well, okay, that's really fascinating to think about. And then even the physical health thing, I had the flu like a couple months ago, and I dragged myself to class. I soldiered on like a good Gen Xer because I wasn't gonna like make it someone else's issue. And then when I showed up, I thought, I bet they would be horrified if they knew I was here bringing germs into their space. Like now
Right.
that's post COVID. That's like super taboo, but that's not what we learned, right? You can be, I worked with a healthcare organization who said, like, our older doctors only use their call out days if they're bleeding on the side of the road. But our younger doctors seem to use them so they don't end up bleeding on the side of the road. And I was like, oh, that, Dan, is fascinating to me. Like, that is what we're talking about. It's like, can we make room for both of those things, or does that end up creating so much tension that it becomes destructive?
Sort of, the adage is stiff upper lip. Well, one wants to show you their lip, the other is going to just hide their lip. And whereas a couple generations have learned how to keep calm and carry on and suck it up, buttercup, others are like,
Mhm.
no, let's work together. Can I talk about this? I mean, I see this. To your point, I see this everywhere I go in the consulting that I do for organizations around the world. There's a lot of leaders who are Xers and boomers that cannot crack the code because they've not had the lived experience, and they can't put themselves from an empathetic perspective, cognitive, emotionally, or sympathetically into the heads, heart, and minds and hands, if you will, of the individuals who think it's de rigueur. It's just normal. This is me. And so this work life cognitive dissonance between older crystallized intelligence leaders and the kind of fluid younger millennials and Gen Zers, I think is partially a consternation point for both sides, and which is kind of sad. But as you said when we just began our conversation, you've got hope, and that's what I'm going to hold you to, because there is some good work out there that's going on as well.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think so.
Well, I could keep you for probably another 3 or 4 hours. I'd love to have you back because we just cracked the surface, so to say, of so many different topics. I want to next time get in it with you. Sorry, about talent, about promotions, about performance, about all kinds of other bits. But for now, Dr. Gerhardt, where can we find out more about you and your work?
Well, I would love to come back anytime. Gentelligence.org is probably the easiest place to find me. So that has, all of our articles, workshops, talks, our Gentelligence Academy, which is a great sort of digital platform to dig into all this a little bit further. So would love to have people reach out.
Amazing. We'll put that in the show notes and everywhere else it goes. Dr. Megan Gerhardt, she's professor of management and leadership at Miami University's Farmer School of Business. The book, of course, Gentelligence, a revolutionary approach to leading an intergenerational workforce. Megan, thank you so much for this. It's been a blast. Can't wait to chat again.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thanks all for listening or watching to another episode of Leadership Now with me, Dan Pontifrac.